Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Vedic Astrology podcast. My name is Fiona Marks, and I'm happy to be here with you again. Today, we are having a look at what would Vedic astrology say to your 20-year-old self. This has come about because as a life coach, this is the time of year when I'm invited to speak to new students, new classes at universities and colleges around the world, and about getting the most out of the opportunity that they have in front of them. Maybe it might be about time management, project management, stress management, study life balance, Ayurveda and daily routines, meditation, yoga for stress, pranayama for studying. All of those are reasons why people approach a life coach during this transition to university. And of course, I also get asked to speak about the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator, about MBTI, and sometimes I even get invited to speak about Vedic astrology. So what would Vedic astrology say to your 20-year-old self? Wherever you are in your life now, is there something that you would have liked to have known then, that you've had to learn the hard way? And is there really any other way to learn? Why don't you pause the podcast now and really reflect on this question, write down your answer, and then use it throughout the podcast today as a touchstone or a gauge of how useful astrology could have been, because I would love to hear your thoughts. I imagine for the average person on the street, the idea of a Vedic astrologer providing career advice or life advice to college students is frightening. We live in a society where astrology has been so defamed, denigrated, criticized, that it seems an outrageous and dangerous influence to expose these impressionable minds to such pseudoscience. But of course, it's really interesting to me because as I've been qualified in MBTI, the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator, for more than 20 years. And it's widely used to give career advice and recruit staff and establish effective teams. So what's the difference between Vedic astrology and MBTI, and why is one seen as credible and the other not? MBTI was developed by a brilliant mother and daughter team. Catherine, for example, the mother, graduated college at 14 years of age. And once she became a mother, she became fascinated with psychology and began observing differences in people's personalities. By chance, she stumbled upon a copy of Carl Jung's Psychological Types, and it clicked with her immediately. Some of the observations that she was making really fit with what she was reading about in Jung's work. And that was based on his clinical work and research. And this became the focus for her calling, finding questions that help sort people into one type or another. Her daughter joined in this work, and over decades they generated and refined hundreds of questions that eventually became their MBTI instrument that is used in 88% of Fortune 500 companies today. The MBTI is used in workplaces all over the world, and it has several strengths to offer in this area. Number one is that it's always focused on work, not on psychosis, not on understanding your entire psychology, just work. And this is because the genesis of the tool formed during those war years, during the Second World War, when thousands of women were entering the workforce, and the idea of an efficient tool that would give new recruits the right work from day one appealed to employers and bosses and governments alike. So the tool was always funneled through this filter of being applicable to sorting people into jobs. I guess the underlying idea embedded in the MBTI is that you will be efficient and enjoy a job that you are naturally good at. The other factor that makes it so useful in workplaces is that all of the MBTI types They're all good. There's no bad types. There's no unproductive employees. There's just people in the wrong jobs. So in that way, it's very affirming. Communicate about differences between each other in a team in a non-judgmental or more objective way. And while it has a lot of strengths, so much so that people are literally recruited and sorted into teams based on their type, it also has a lot of problems too. One is it's a self-select tool. You pick the answers you want, you choose them yourself. So it's not very objective. In fact, it's the opposite. By design, it is a subjective indicator. And this leads to one of its major criticisms, that your MBTI type changes over time. The results you get at 18 are probably going to be different from the results you get when you're 42 or when you're 65. Maybe more of an objection is that it wasn't developed by psychologists. It's really not necessarily psychologically valid. Catherine and Isabel were amateurs. They were brilliant amateurs, but nevertheless, their model is not based on modern or academic theories of personality. And of course, just like astrology, MBTI is a pseudoscience. That is, it can't be disproved. And we talked all about that in episode 2 of the podcast, if you want to go back and refresh your memory about what is the definition of a pseudoscience. So given all of that, why is MBTI so popular in the corporate world? Why are people willing to accept the pseudoscience-ness of MBTI and not of astrology? One of the criticisms or rabbit holes that astrology gets pulled into all the time is, what is it based on? People object to thinking that Jupiter or a Mercury retrograde or any heavenly body could possibly have an effect on their personality or their career or their future. And I kind of really admire this about MBTI because it just dodges that question entirely. MBTI does not try in any way to explain why someone is ESTJ or an INFP, whether it's genetic, whether it's exposure, whether it's cultural, whether it's nurture, the type of education you have. It doesn't even go there. So I love that they just dodge that question entirely. And while MBTI might be good at pointing you in the right direction for your career and your learning style and how you solve problems, and I think MBTI really does help with these things because it's very affirming and it helps you value things in yourself that you might otherwise not realize are sought after skills in a particular industry. So it's very good at all that stuff, but it can't say anything about timing and how you will feel about that type of work that you're doing and where that career will fit into the rest of your life and how your work will change over time. And this is where Vedic astrology has so much more to offer. So if we're comfortable with young people being able to survive the pseudoscience of MBTI, let's see what Vedic astrology could share. For this podcast, I asked a couple of classes of new university students what they would be interested in knowing from Vedic astrology. And I think I gave them like 9 or 10 choices around, of course, life path and career, but also purpose and timing. And out of that list, the top choices were knowing something about my life path, my career, where I will find happiness, what I will worry about, and what will cause losses. So really interesting in itself just to reflect on what 20-year-olds want to know about their future in the context of starting university. For example, on this list is not purpose, not life purpose, and also not legacy, which I think if we ask this question later in life, people often become quite interested in their legacy. But in our 20s, it's probably not something that we think about. So in today's episode, We're going to look about what Vedic astrology can say around these topics. We're going to look at the context of Vedic astrology for career advice, which we just covered by comparing it to the Myers-Briggs. And we're going to look at 2 case studies of young people and 1 case study of a very old person. Looking back at your reflections that you wrote down at the start of this podcast about what Vedic astrology could share with your 20-year-old self, would you have been interested in life path, career, happiness, worries, and losses? How can Vedic astrology help in these areas? Today, I'm going to look at answering those questions using combinations of planets and houses. Obviously, there are many, many other ways to use astrology to help answer these questions. So I'm going to go through this perspective, but I really encourage you to apply any techniques that you know that work well for you. But if you're joining me today and you want to know what your 20-year-old self could have got from Vedic astrology, let's sit up now, take notes, and get started. So if your 20-year-old self wants to know something about life path, Vedic astrology is a great place to start because it puts life path front and center of each birth chart reading, reminding us that everyone has a different life path. This conventional life path of school, university, marriage, mortgage, children, retirement might not be the path for everyone. And yet this is how it can seem at 20 years of age, because in general, most of us go through conventional face-to-face, sit-down, primary, middle, and high school. So it's a little bit of a factory experience where all young people start somewhere around 5 or 6 and go through this factory of education and come out at 17 or 18, supposing to know what they're going to do with their life. And that factory of education, those first years, the primary, middle, and high school, can give one the impression that all of life is a bit of a factory with these similar milestones like 4th grade and 6th grade and 8th grade. And Vedic astrology is great at reminding us that there are as many life paths as there are charts and as there are people. Who in this audience knew what they wanted to do at 16 or 18 or 20? For some, it was crystal clear. And for others, they might still be figuring it out now. It's quite interesting, actually, the case studies I've got, maybe they all knew in some ways what they were supposed to be doing at 16, 18, or 20. So we've got quite an interesting bunch of case studies to look at. One of the things to keep in mind when we're speaking to young people about their astrology is the concept of the maturity of planets. And this might be one of the reasons why sometimes people know exactly what they're going to be doing from the age of 18 or 14 or some young age. And others of us take a long time to know what it is that we're supposed to be doing. So in Vedic astrology, it is accepted that different planets mature at different times. And I guess the idea is that the potential of that planet and the skills that it takes to use that planet well and to gain the most from the potential of that planet take time to develop. And some take more time than others. So generally it's seen like this. Jupiter matures at 16 years of age. The Sun at 22. The Moon at 24. Venus at 25. Mars at 28, Mercury at 32, Saturn at 36, Rahu at 42, and Ketu at 48. So these planets are spread all through that, from where we're starting today, talking to people as they transition from high school to college, all the way through your career, just about up until your 50s. And I think that this is a really helpful thing to keep in mind. Just knowing that can be helpful, knowing that it takes time for each of these powerful parts of our energetic makeup to be at their highest potential. And incidentally, MBTI also has a version of this built into their framework as well, called the Grants model, and explains how one develops one's preferences over time. But perhaps that's a topic for a different podcast. So not only has Vedic astrology already helped our 20-year-old self by letting us know that we might not be on a standard life path because there isn't one, but also at 20, we are still more than a lifetime away from some of those planets being at full maturity. I think this is a great context for young people to understand their life and their confusion at this age of maybe not knowing what their calling is yet. And incidentally, each of those planets' maturities is also affected by being in conjunction. So if one of the planets is conjunct with a planet that matures later, we talk about both of those planets not maturing until the later one does. So really puts in context why some people hit their stride early and other people takes more time. Now, returning to the idea of life path. When we're considering a person's life path, the first house and the planet that rules that house are really important. So you can look at your own chart and just identify what is your first house and what planet rules that house. And then to break it down even a little bit more, it can be really useful to look at those signs and the houses and think about how they are in the goals of life. That is the purusarthas, the artha, kama, dharma, and moksha signs and houses. So this concept from Vedic philosophy or yoga philosophy is that we've got these 4 pursuits, 4 goals, 4 paths that all humans are walking to different extents during their life, pursuing these 4 goals in different ratios. So when we talk about artha as a goal, it's all of those things that we need to do to look after the physical manifestation of being in a body. There's things like earning money, having a roof over your head, having the things that allow the security for you to continue being here on the planet. So they're very important material needs that we're responsible for, that we work for, that we must do those jobs in order to maintain the body. Then there are kama houses, and kama is our desires, the things that we come on this planet to experience through the body. They're the play, desires, aspirations, the fun things that one can only do here on planet Earth. Very important as well. And then we have the dharma houses and signs, which are in some ways our duties, what we must do in order to feel at one with ourselves, with life. I think about them as being when one gets to the pearly gates and St. Peter or whoever's there says, did you do what you went down there to achieve? They're our must do, those duties that for each of us is different. And some people use the word inspiration around the dharma houses. They're our callings that they're not financial, they're not for pleasure, they are what we are called to do. So we've got artha, kama, dharma. And the 4th type of goal that people are pursuing is moksha, or liberation, enlightenment, moving beyond the illusion of the material and experiencing liberation of the true self. Both the signs and the houses tell us a little bit about which one of these goals that sign or house is interested in pursuing. And this can be really useful when you want to understand something about your life path. You can immediately check which one of these goals is relevant to the sign of your first house and to wherever the planet that rules your first house is now located. So where your first house is going to shed a lot of light on your life path. And where the planet goes is also going to be important, because if it's the same, we really get that resonating. For example, if it's the first house is in Aries, then we know that the sign of Aries is a Dharma sign. It's got that inspiration, duty, energy. And if Mars, which rules that planet, has gone into Leo, for example, another Dharma house, then we know that this person is really going to be driven around their calling and what they feel pulled, impelled, what they must do here in this lifetime. However, of course, they could be different, providing balancing or conflicting indicators. So there are a million things that we could look at in terms of life path, but to keep it simple for a 1-hour podcast, let's focus on just looking at those indicators for the first house. And then the second area that students said that they would be interested in understanding what Vedic astrology could share was around career. And just like we did with the first house, we can use the same approach with the 10th house. The 10th house is the house of karma and activity. The 10th house is that very visible, top of the sky house, and it is seen as the activity that we do outside of the home. It's our most public activity. It's what we're known for. What goal is the sign of that 10th house? Is it a karma, an artha, a dharma, or a moksha? And the planet that rules that 10th house, where has it gone in the chart, and what can that tell us? And then we can begin saying, is that a match for the first house? And it might tell us a little bit depending on when each of those planets mature. It might tell us about which of those is going to feel more competent, or we're going to have a stronger potential with earlier in our life. Beautifully, the next thing that students showed interest in was happiness. And I love how Vedic astrology makes it so clear that happiness is a completely separate thing to wealth, to love, to work, to fame. It's its own thing. And you can see it in the chart. How my 20-year-old self would have loved to know where to look for that. So in astrology, in Vedic astrology, we think of the fourth house as giving us information about contentment and inner peace, about our happiness. We want to know what sign that is, therefore what goal it's pursuing. We also want to know where that planet, who owns that, goes, when does it mature, who is it with. And another area that we could look at for happiness, we could just scan the Vargas a little bit at this point, because if one has a really strong Rashi chart, birth chart, with many good factors, good indicators, good placements, one might feel less than happy if the Varga charts are actually not as good as that Rashi chart, because it's like having the most beautiful tree, beautiful, strong tree that doesn't produce very much fruit, or that the fruit that it produces is unreliable or small or doesn't ripen at all. And conversely, the opposite. If someone's Rashi chart is weak in areas, but then the Vaga charts are strong, that person might feel happy because their expectation, they feel like they've got a bit this weedy tree, it's just not the strongest tree on the block or in the orchard, but everybody loves the fruit that comes from that tree. So I think that feeds into happiness as well. And then I thought these last two things were really interesting, that these very wise students were asking, what am I going to worry about? What will preoccupy me? And for this, the third house can be an invaluable place to look. It's about what occupies the mind, our hobbies, our interests and distractions. So the same thing, we want to know what planet is the owner of the third house. And it can be really handy to look at what other house that planet rules, because for most ascendants, our planets end up ruling two houses. Depends exactly where your ascendant sign is, but often you'll end up ruling two houses. For example, if your ascendant is in Aries or Libra, the planet that rules your third house is also going to rule your sixth house. So Aries and Libra might think about and worry about, become preoccupied about sixth house things such as obstacles and debts and complications and their daily practices. Whereas for Taurus and Gemini, the third house is its own indicator, because for Taurus, it's ruled by the moon that only rules one house. For Gemini, it's ruled by the sun. And therefore, Taurus might think about moon types of things, emotions, and Geminis might think about sun types of things, about leaderships and authorities and structures in that way, sun types of things. For Cancer and Capricorn, the third ruler also rules the 12th. So one can often worry about losses. And that's interesting because the students wanted to know also about losses. So I think it's really interesting. We'll see how many Cancer and Capricorns we have there. For Leo, Aquarius, the third is also ruling the 10th. So Leo and Aquarius can worry about work and their status. Virgo and Pisces, it's ruled the 3rd and the 8th. So it's kind of a challenging combination because the 8th is so changeable. And we can worry about the unknown and change and transformation, death, all of that unknown occult type of thoughts can preoccupy the mind. And then in Sagittarius, we have the third lord also ruling the 2nd. So then can worry about finances and nourishment and resources. And we want to know what is the state of this planet, because it's going to tell us a lot about whether we worry or not. If that planet is in a difficult situation, a bit unbalanced, a bit stretched, it's obviously going to be more likely to worry. So we'll go look at the 3rd house for that. And then for losses, the 12th house can be very insightful. We want to see what sign it is, who rules it, is it with any other planets? And it's probably good for us also to look at Saturn because it is that planet of losses. So now we have a summary of these main places in the chart to look to answer the questions of perhaps our or some 20-year-old selves. We're going to look at the 1st house for life path. We're going to keep the idea of maturity of planets in our mind, because with young people, it's really marked what's going on in their maturing of planets. We're going to look at the 10th house for career. We're going to look at the 4th house for happiness and a little dip into the Vagas. We're going to look at the 3rd house and any co-rulerships that it has for worries, and we're going to look at the 12th and Saturn for losses. Now, being as we don't have our classroom, of students here today, we're going to take the opportunity to dive into some case studies. And before we begin, let's keep in mind, I am not the personal astrologer of any of these people. The birth times that I have could be entirely wrong. So as we head into these case studies, we want to remember that we don't actually know these people personally. We don't know their birth times. So therefore, we're not talking about the real person. We are talking about the shared public image, that knowledge that the public has, that this person has put out into the world, that's created an archetype that we're going to call person A, B, or C. But we need to remember that we don't know actually the real person. So this is like a caricature of a person. It's imperfect, like so many things in our world at the moment. But with this shared imagination that we have of the person, these people help us to take the concepts of the techniques of Vedic astrology and make them meaningful, make them rememberable, and take them from the abstract to the concrete, if we want to use an MBTI analogy. We have been lucky enough in Astrolojam over the last few months to have a look at the charts of some very young, successful people. And for those of you who don't know what Astrolojam is, it's a monthly get-together that I host for astrologers and astrology enthusiasts of all persuasions, where we pre-researched an agreed chart and we bring our insights to the group so that we can jam together, just like musicians, building on each other's riffs and having some fun, sharing our love of the techniques of astrology. We have looked at some dead people. The current person that we have coming up is extremely old, but we're lucky enough to have had a couple of very young celebrities. So I'm going to call on their charts for material today. And the first person I'm going to look at is Billie Eilish. And I think she might have been the subject of Astrolojam 2, which we did way back before the summer. She is 19 years old, so she's the perfect age for our podcast today. I am loading up into the description for this podcast the link to the website for this podcast where you can go and have a look at the chart. So I'll put those there for you. And I'm going to give you the birth data now in case you want to put it into your own software. We have a birth date of December 18, 2001, and it was at 11 a.m. Los Angeles, California. And let me just bring that up on my screen as well. We should be looking at a chart with a Pisces ascendant, with Mars on the ascendant in the first house, Aries is the second house, Taurus is the third house. We have Gemini as the fourth house with Saturn and Rahu, and Cancer as the fifth house with Jupiter. Then Leo is the sixth house, Virgo, seventh house, Libra, eighth house, Scorpio, ninth house. In the 10th house, we have Venus, the Sun, and Ketu, all in Sagittarius. We have Capricorn as the 11th house with Mercury. And we have Aquarius, the 12th house with the Moon. Let's have a look at life path for this chart. And what we can see straight away is that the first house is in Pisces. We know that Pisces is a water sign and a moksha sign. So there's going to be something ethereal and flowing and maybe transcendent about this person's life path. Now, Pisces is owned by Jupiter, and Jupiter in this chart has gone to the fifth house of Cancer, which is another water sign. another moksha sign, it happens to be where Jupiter is exalted. And not only that, it's only receiving Rashi aspect from a waxing moon, which is the owner of this sign. So we're seeing a lot of support, a lot of nice placements in this life path. And the other thing that we know is that Jupiter is the first planet to mature at 16 years of age. So putting all of those together, this is someone who's going to experience an exalted life path early in life. There's a lot of support for the flow of this placement. And let's straight away turn to career and then bring these two together, because if we look at the 10th house, we see that it is Sagittarius, and it is also ruled by Jupiter. So Jupiter, which is exalted in Cancer in this chart, it's the strongest in Shadbala in the chart. It's very assisted in Drikbala. It's got 48 points of Drikbala, and it's Rashi aspected by the moon. And in fact, have a beautiful Raj Yoga here. We have the 10th Lord in the 5th house. And we also know from looking at the life path, we've got the first Lord in the 5th house. So this is exactly the kind of person that you are never going to see for career advice, because everything is going beautifully for life path and career for this person. We've got 2 moksha signs, and we've got 2 dharma goals also. So very a feeling of this person doing exactly what they've come here to do, and that supporting liberation. So this must feel great. She is inspired. Her life path and her career are aligned. They're exalted, and by luck, because it's Jupiter, they've matured early. So even though this person is 19 years old, she's able to get the full potential out of this placement because the planet is ready to give all of that so early. And let's not forget that the moon rules music. So we've got this beautiful Raja Yoga happening in the sign of the moon with Rashi aspects from the moon. So everything lining up beautifully here, pointing to the fact that this person's never going to need a career counselor. And what about happiness for this person? We want to go look at the 4th house. In this chart, it's Gemini. That's a karma sign, a sign of desires. And the ruler of the 4th house is Mercury, and it is also in a karma house. It's in the 11th house. And we know that the 11th house is also a house that gets better over time. So there are some very good indicators around happiness there, that following her desires is indicated here. However, we do have to point out that in the 4th house, we have Saturn and Rahu. And this combination, when Saturn and Rahu are conjunct, makes for a lot of fear and risk-taking in the same house. So Saturn doesn't want to take any risks. Rahu, is just wants to jump out of every plane, parachute or not. And they're kind of like push, pull in the same house. And they're both late maturing. So Rahu is going to hold back Saturn there well into the beginning of the 40s. So this is something that the person may feel that it's going to take time to learn how to work with these energies in order to feel happy. Might be something, there's a lot of freedom and ease early on, unlike what we saw with the life path and the career that was just so full of grace. In terms of the Vagas, the D10 is doing really well. All of the dignities are better than in the D1, so this person may feel also really happy with her success in work, that it is something that she feels called to do and inspired to do, and it also gives a lot of fruit. In terms of what the person may worry about, we can look at the third house, which in this case is Taurus. Taurus is owned by Venus, and Venus rules the 8th house of sudden changes, of death, the occult, of transformation. So we talked earlier about that this is in some ways a little difficult combination when a planet rules both the 3rd and the 8th. And then on top of that, it's gone into the 10th house, where Venus is being shamed in a large Charyavashta by the Sun. So you may feel like her own tastes must be sacrificed for the greatness that she's trying to achieve. And she may worry about the good things that she has in her life that may feel are concerning to her, not something that feels comfortable, maybe some shame around that. So there's a little bit destabilizing here in the worries. And this is what's really great to keep in mind, that someone can have a wonderful Raj Yoga, and she does, and she has really taken that to an amazing success of her inspiration, of her voice. Wonderful, wonderful thing. But she may still have some challenges around happiness, we talked about with the Saturn Rahu situation, and also here she may worry about those unknowns and about whether she deserves all of these things, whether one should feel comfortable with this level of success. So even those of us with the best charts doesn't mean there aren't areas that are also concerning. And finally, losses for this house is the 12th house is in Aquarius. And we have Aquarius ruled by Saturn. We know that Saturn is linked to losses. When it's in the 4th, it's connected to the heart and the emotions. Saturn in this chart is low in Ayana Bala, and it makes the person feel really hurt when conflict or adversity happens. So if there are any losses, this person may feel them quite deeply, and she may really want to avoid losses, just knowing how raw and how profoundly, intensely she's going to feel that loss. Maybe might want to avoid it actively, or just never try to ever go into that space. So if this person was to come for a 20-year-old, what am I going to do with my life? We can see this is probably not what she's going to do, but what could Vedic astrology say? We could definitely say that she has a path of her own, that she will have early exalted success. And this is a life that should follow its inspirations and its dharma. There is no need for this chart to go down that conventional path of the factory of school. I think this person may even have been homeschooled. So what a blessing to have parents that are supporting the uniqueness of this chart from the beginning. But if they were, can you imagine, being told you must go to university and you must, get some conventional job and some security? It's just not the right template for this kind of life. There's great success and fame guaranteed by that beautiful Jupiter with a good D10, but the person may worry about their own good fortune. They might feel ashamed of their blessings, and their happiness is restrained or marred by the involvement of Saturn in the 4th and as the 12th Lord. She also has a malefic on the ascendant, which makes the path a little bit more difficult. And with Rahu on the 4th, this is not someone who finds happiness, that is unbridled happiness and joy, an easy thing. There is a heart here that is very vulnerable to deep pain and could be guarded. 3 of the planets are with nodes, and that delays the maturation to 42 years of age or 48 years of age. So the life path, career part of this chart is likely to soar from an early age, but other things might take time. And that might be where a conversation, the Vedic astrology conversation with this 20-year-old might be about balancing that or accepting that disparity between enormous success and grace in this one area, which is exactly what the chart wants, and it's a wonderful thing. And at the same time, those inner experiences, those inner doubts, demons, the need to protect the heart. This conversation might help the person see that both of those things exist at the same time, and that over time they will mature and they will feel like something that can be harnessed and usefully utilized, even though right now those more inner areas perhaps don't feel that they are connected to this stunning grace. Let's have a look at a second chart to see how different people's lives can be. Because the next chart I'd like to look at is another young person. It is Naomi Osaka, the tennis player. This is definitely a hypothetical case study because we don't know a birth time for Naomi Osaka. We do know that she is 23 years of age, so she's right in the age range of our imaginary what would Vedic astrology say to a 20-year-old. And just like Billie Eilish, she's achieved success at a young age. But what would Vedic astrology say if she was asking for life direction advice? And how would it be different to Billie Eilish? So, as we said, we don't have a published birth time for Naomi Osaka. And this makes it even more of a hypothetical case study. However, we looked at this chart for our most recent Astrolojam. We all got together and came up with an estimate. And so you can go down to the webpage and connect the diagram there, or you can put into your software October 16, 1997 at any time around 3 a.m. in Osaka, Japan. And that will give us a Virgo ascendant. So in our imaginary case study here, what do we know about Virgo in terms of its goals? It is an Artha sign. It is about hard work. The life path of this person involves hard work. And Virgo is ruled by Mercury. And Mercury in this chart also goes into an Artha house, the second house. That reminds me that I have not spoken to you about the layout of this chart, so I apologize. Taking a step back, in this imaginary case study, I'm placing the ascendant in Virgo, and I have Rahu in the first house of the sign of Virgo of this chart. The second house is in Libra, where I have also Mercury and the Sun in the second house. The third house is Scorpio. The fourth house is Sagittarius, and I have Venus and Mars there together. Then Capricorn is the fifth house. Aquarius is the sixth house with Jupiter present. The seventh house is Pisces with Ketu. And the eighth house is Aries with the Moon and Saturn extremely closely conjunct the moon at 16 degrees and 23 minutes, Saturn at 16 degrees and 28 minutes. And then all of the other signs do not have planets in them. So we've got Taurus, the 9th house, Gemini, the 10th house, Cancer, the 11th house, and Leo, the 12th house. Okay, so returning to looking at the life path, we've got a Virgo ascendant. We know that Virgo is an Arta sign. That is a sign of work, responsibilities, of doing things to look after my material needs. And it is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury has gone into the 2nd house, which is an Arta house, all about resources and responsibilities. So whereas with Billie Eilish's chart, we could almost say that all of that fame and success comes from past life grace. In Naomi Osaka's chart, her success comes from work, from hard work, from daily practice. This is where I think Vedic astrology is so useful for 20-year-olds. If we think about that new orientation class of students, and we had these two people sitting in the class, Billie Eilish, Naomi Osaka, one is going to almost flow through life. It's just so much water, so much moksha energy. And the other is going to really apply herself to daily work and attention, hard work. These two women are successful. They are living their life to the full. They're doing an amazing job of being themselves and who they are, showing us so much, teaching us so much. And yet they've got completely different drives that are at this innate level of the chart. And can you imagine trying to tell Billie Eilish that she needs to knuckle down and do the hard work and be responsible, just like we're telling Naomi Osaka to, float into her imagination and wander and be inspired. They're just got different drives, and it's great to honor the drive that you have. In the Naomi Osaka's chart, Mercury is also combust the sun. So Mercury, this planet that rules the 1st house, is in the same sign as the sun, and it's about just over a degree away from the sun. So striving for greatness is intense and serious for this person. They are going to feel that they are not good enough. When any planet is next to the sun, one feels inferior to the sun. Everybody feels inferior to the sun because the sun is just so brilliant. It's the center of our solar system. It is the light that fuels all life. It is the gravity around which all of us orbit. So when a planet is close to the sun, it feels that it's not good enough. This is backed up in the chart by Saturn being starved by Mars. So if you see Saturn is there in Aries, Mars is in Sagittarius, giving plenty of planetary aspect and giving the larger Charyavashta of starvation. In my calculations, Mars is giving 456 points of starvation, and Saturn only has 300 points. So very overwhelming sense of pressure from Mars, giving us a sense that we are behind and we have to catch up and we are just not good enough. We need to do more and more and more. So I'm only bringing that up because it's really mirrored by what's happening to Mercury, the ruler of the 1st house. And we know that success may come before we're ready because Mercury is not maturing until 32. It's being pushed by the sun that matures at 22. So that there's that pressure already there. And then we happen to have Rahu on the ascendant. It's not maturing until 42. So there's a lot of things happening before we're ready, a lot of pressure there. And when the sun is agitating Mercury, when it's combusting Mercury, it gives problems with communication, because Mercury is the generic karaka for communication. So we have trouble with boundaries, with asking for what we want, with feeling that we can protect ourselves from that glaring sun. So these are some of the observations we can make about the life path of this person. Big contrast to Billie Eilish, much more serious, hard work kind of vibe here. And if we look at career, just like Billie Eilish, the ruler of the first house, Mercury, is also ruling the 10th house. It's also ruling Gemini. And this means that everything that we just said about life path applies to career as well. The career becomes something that is hard work. The career becomes something that we do every day, that we take responsibility for, that we feel responsible for, that needs our attention and effort every day. This is someone who is going to work for her money and status. And maybe we could just say this is someone who's going to work, period. This is a worker, a responsible worker type of energy. Happiness. Happiness for this chart, we're going to look at the 4th house. It is Sagittarius, a Dharma sign. It's ruled by Jupiter. And Jupiter is in the 6th house, which, guess what, is another Artha house. So even happiness is linked back to hard work. Just echoing that this person has a work ethic. And Vedic astrology helps us to appreciate how we are all different. But this is someone who we can say is going to work hard even for their happiness. When we think about worrying and the 3rd house, we've got Scorpio as the 3rd house of this chart. It's a moksha sign. Mars is the planet that owns Scorpio, and it has gone into the 4th house, which is also a moksha house. So we've got the enlightenment, liberation energy here around the worries. The same as Billie Eilish's chart, we have a combination where the 3rd house ruler also rules the 8th house. And so there can be a lot of worrying because of all of the moksha connections, the Scorpio being a moksha sign and the 4th house where Mars is being a moksha house. Person may worry about, is this all worth it? Can I escape from work and transcend? Is there something more than work? This might be what preoccupies the mind. And as Mars also rules the 8th house of death and transformation, of psychic energy, the occult, the unknown, and it's in a house of inner peace, there may even be anxiety and worries, perhaps even a paranoia, because the 8th house of the unknown is right there in this inner house, our house of inner peace, the 4th house, and it rules the 3rd house, what we worry about. It's with Venus, and that is stirring up those passions in a fire sign. And we know that Saturn is also ruling the 5th house of the intellect, and Saturn, we know, is fearful. It's just part of how that planetary energy is. So this person may be preoccupied and have anxieties that are could be quite occupying for the mind, could be maybe paranoia or obsessive for the mind, this sense of change, of that 8th house energy of being, it's unreliable, it's unknown. And it's being stirred up whenever Venus is with Mars. There's more passion, they kind of heat each other. So this is an area where the person may have quite some worries going on in their mind. And losses for this house, the 12th house of this chart is Leo. It's owned by the sun. The sun, of course, is in an Artha house. We know that now with this chart, that there's just going to be a lot of Artha energy So even the losses are linked to our sense of work. Maybe because it's the sun, we may have losses in relation to authorities, father to work, because it's the second house in relation to speech or speaking. And if we think about Saturn as being related to loss as well, it's in very tight conjunction with the moon. The moon and Saturn are both in the 8th house of death and change and transformation. So the emotions could be very heavy and depressing and morose around change. In summary, for Naomi Osaka, what can we say if this person is in that room in her 20s, thinking, how do I get the most out of my life, out of this opportunity? So we definitely know that this person will achieve success through hard work. And that's great, because sometimes people say, you know, be in your bliss, or do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And for this kind of chart where we see so much after energy, this is someone who's going to work, and they're going to work hard, and that's their energetic footprint, or I don't know, template, blueprint. So this is a great thing for this kind of person to be working hard. That is exactly in the flow for them, even though for another person, perhaps more the Billie Eilish type of person, that person does follow their bliss and just do what flows naturally, and that's how they succeed. So it's great to recognize what path you're on and how you're going to approach that path, and don't give yourself a hard time for that, and don't try to be on someone else's path. So this person's going to work hard. That's what we know. We know that her life path is going to be unusual and unexpected because we have Rahu on that first house. And with Rahu on the first house, it's going to make it hard for people to know how to read her, and for them to know how to classify her. And she'll be a mystery to others, as well as she'll be a mystery to herself. So that advice that we give to the 20-year-old is embrace that is a feature of your life, and go with it, work with it. There's a lot of working in this chart. We've got the first Lord in the second house, the 10th Lord in the second house, the Lord of happiness in the 6th house of work, the partnership and business is in the 6th house of work, and the 12th Lord is also in the second house. There's a lot of heaviness in this chart as well, because we've got that 4th Lord of happiness is in the 6th house, and we've got the sun and moon very closely conjunct, giving that heavy emotional energy. That might make her want to worry about escaping and transcending, but that will seem impossible with all of this heaviness. She still might daydream about it. And thinking about liberation is not linked to her work. Her work is not leading her towards liberation or peace. So we could say to this person, be gentle with yourself. Don't worry about being great. Explore the mystery of yourself. Don't look to work for fulfillment, and it will take time for you to find your true path. And because we know this imaginary person, Naomi Osaka, we might even postulate that the success that she's having now might not be what she does with the whole of her life. Okay, so 2 very interesting case studies of different young people. And let's have a look now at a completely different age range. Let's look at Prince Charles. We've had 2 young people, but what about someone who's been waiting to start their career for more than 50 years? Prince Charles, the birth details are November 14, 1948 at 21:14, so 9:14 p.m. in London, United Kingdom. And that chart will give us a Leo ascendant. So the first house is Leo. The second house is Virgo, and we have Saturn in the second house. The third house is Libra. We have Venus in its own home in Libra. Then in the 4th house of Scorpio, we have Sun, Mercury, Ketu. So we know we've got a shamed Lajatadiyavasha there in Scorpio, the 4th house. In the 5th house of Sagittarius, we have Jupiter and Mars. Then Capricorn is our 6th house, Aquarius the 7th house, Pisces the 8th house, Aries the 9th house. And then in Taurus, exalted, we have the Moon and Rahu. In Taurus, the 10th house of this chart. The 11th house is Gemini and the 12th house is Cancer. This chart is a Leo ascendant, so it's a good start for a king, right? Leo is a Dharma house. That is the things that one must do. There's a whole lot of duty when one is born into a royal lineage. And Leo is ruled by the sun. And the sun in this chart is in the 4th house of Scorpio. Now, this should be a Raja Yoga, right? It's a trinal lord. That's the 1st house lord, is both trinal and an angular. And it's in an angular house, the 4th house. So if we think back to Billie Eilish, she had the 1st lord in the 5th house and the 10th lord in the 5th house. Beautiful Raja Yoga. This person has the 1st lord, trinal lord, in an angular house, the 4th house. So it should feel wonderful. But what do we find? We have Mercury, the 11th lord there. Mercury is ruling Gemini, the 11th house, and it is in the 4th house. And what do we know? One of those strange things about Vedic astrology, the 11th lord breaks a Raja Yoga. It is the yoga breaker. This person may feel all the potential that they should be happy. Their 1st lord is in the 4th house, so this should feel wonderful, and yet it doesn't. What I find when I speak to people who have Raja Yogas that are broken by the 11th lord, it's in their grasp. It's all there. They can feel it, but it will not come to fruition. So it's a very disappointing, unsatisfying experience. And not only that, K2 is there as well, the perfectionist. So it's making this incredibly frustrating and creating a shamed avashta for Mercury. Not only that, of course, K2 is conjunct with the sun, which creates strong self-doubts and a feeling of lack in everything the person does. We could think about it that K2 is indicating that this soul has already been a king in other lifetimes. And in this lifetime, K2 is going to create all the inner doubts, which we can then see on the outside. They become outer doubts as well. So K2 is doing this in order to free the person from their attachment and their identification with power, status, and leadership. So what a life path placement this is. That's a lot to experience. What an acute awareness this person is going to have of there being a disappointment. They've got this broken Raja Yoga. They've got K2 influencing the sun. And not only that, K2 is going to hold back both the sun and Mercury from maturing, so that they will be the last to mature, just like K2, all the way at 48. On the plus side, this is someone who's going to feel better with age. But we can see that this is a really complex life path placement. You imagine being born the first son of a ruling king or queen. You imagine the life path is super easy, right? Of all the people on the planet, you know exactly what you're going to do. And yet here we have all of these disappointments and a very acute sense of failure, perhaps, and linked to one's happiness, one's inner peace and contentment. So let's have a look at career, because we think this person should have a clear career. And in this chart, the 10th house is Taurus, an Archer sign. It's going to, the career is going to be work, hard work. Taurus is ruled by Venus, and Venus is in the 3rd house of hobbies and interests. It's in its own home. So this person may be famous for their interests rather than their career. Venus, rather than being up there in the 10th house, is actually in the 3rd house of their hobbies and interests. Now, in this 10th house, we have a glorious, nearly full moon right at the top of the sky here. In fact, the moon is exalted, and it's just 3 days away from a lunar eclipse, following on from a total solar eclipse that happened on the 1st of November. This person is going to be famous for their emotions, and they're not going to have that masculine energy that we might imagine. The Sun, Leo, the ruler of this chart, the Sun has actually gone into the 4th house. That is the house that is under the earth when we're born. You know, it's the dark. It's in the darkness, and it's a very inner house. It rules our inner peace. So the masculine energy has gone there into a very inner house, whereas the feminine energy of the moon is right at the top of the sky. So this person's got a much softer masculine energy. And the moon is with Rahu, so others are not going to know how to react to this person's emotions, and neither will this person. They're going to have flashes of brilliance that will be far out and zany, and maybe even impossible to explain logically or rationally, and they're going to be very visible. Quite a disconnect between the life path of the Leo ascendant. Not only is the life path complicated by going into the 4th house where it's with K2 and has all of those self-doubts, so already the life path was quite complicated. Now the career has got a completely different energy and is 180 degrees away from the life path. So a real disconnect or tension or at the extremes between this person's life path and career. And I wanted to include this person because they had a lot of expectations for a conventional life, whereas we might say that Billie Eilish, and I think Naomi Osaka, I think they were both homeschooled. Perhaps we could say that they had already those unconventional experiences of not being in the factory that maybe most of us go through. This person, Prince Charles, has a lot of expectation to have a conventional life. And while that life maybe have access to riches and palaces that you and I can't imagine, the pressure to be conventional, traditional, is very strong. There would be a high expectation of university, of military, of marriage, of leadership. It's kind of the moment this person was born, their path was already set out for them. However, this chart does not indicate a conventional life. And I remember I did this chart for one of my early papers in the Vedic Astrology apprenticeship course. And I remember researching this and finding out that Prince Philip, his father, really recognized that there was a softness to this person, and he wanted to help his son to man up, to be tougher. And so he sent him to a military-style boarding school from a really young age. And this is what I think is so helpful about consulting Vedic astrology with our children, with our young people, is that it doesn't matter how much this chart, the person in this chart, is exposed to the brutality or the toughness, the austerity, the roughness of a masculine schooling environment. Doesn't matter how much you do that, it's not going to change that this person is emotional and zany and doubts themselves. So jumping out of a plane and proving that one can parachute, or whatever extreme skills one can be forced to learn and demonstrate, is not going to change the sun with K2 there in the 4th house. I think that this is very powerful input to the nature-nurture debate that maybe it was a great thing that Prince Charles' father exposed this person to so much of the opposite of the natural chart. Maybe that was a great thing, but it hasn't changed the softness of this person or their left fieldness, the things that they're interested in and that they comment on in such a soft and gentle way are still the hallmarks of this person rather than them being some kind of G.I. Joe action figure. Now, happiness. Happiness in this chart is the 4th house for all of us. It's in Scorpio. It's a moksha sign. Mars is ruling Scorpio and it's in Sagittarius, the 5th house, and that's a Dharma house. So those are good indications. Although we have the 8th Lord is also involved and there's a Rashi aspect from Saturn. So this constrains one's happiness somewhat. But what is really noticeable is that we have a shame Vashta in the 4th house. So this person is going to feel shame when they feel happy. They're kind of linked together. They'll have a very complex relationship with their own happiness. They will feel worthless and that their contributions are causing shame. That's when Mercury is being shamed by the sun with Ketu. One feels like what one communicates is a cause of shame and is worthless. It's not valued. It's not adding value. It's not recognized. So this 4th house of happiness is linked with an inner sense of shame. In terms of worries, we're looking again at the 3rd house, Libra. It's ruled by Venus. Venus is actually in Libra, and the person will think about their hobbies and interests, which might be quite refined because they're Venus. And Libra is a karma sign, so the person may get to do what they want with their hobbies, be able to fulfill their desires around their interests. And they could be famous for that because Venus is also ruling the 10th house. They might also worry about their career and status and fame and their emotions. But doing anything about that career is going to be unfathomable because Rahu is there. So they're going to be very obsessed, interested, focused on that fame and status, but inept at being able to do anything about their career. And in terms of losses, the 12th house here is in Cancer. It's a moksha sign. The moon rules Cancer, and the moon is exalted with Rahu in the 10th house. So this person may be famous for their losses, and Princess Diana comes to mind for that, as does Lord Mountbatten, a very influential figure in the prince's younger life. And of course, this is a career, a 10th house, that cannot start without the loss of their mother. So it's a very unusual career, isn't it, that one has to lose not only one's mother, but the ruler in order to begin one's own career. So what would a Vedic astrologer say to Prince Charles at 20? I think that what would be useful to say is that your inner sense that you are the wrong shape or a very unusual shape for your job, that is validated by this chart. So your sense that your innate self is a very unusual shape for the job of a king, that is correct. And one has to trust that there's a reason for that. So find a way to be you, to be emotional, to be left field. Things are going to take time. We've got that node holding up the life path, right? We've got K2 holding up the maturity of the life path. So things are going to take time. You're going to disappoint a lot of people. Can you find a way to be at peace with that? Not trying to prove them wrong, but to be yourself, so that when you disappoint people, it's for being you and not for being someone that you are not. That's a huge life path to navigate. I think that's a very difficult life path. But this person is born into a unique role with a lot of expectations, and the chart is just set up for them. They're just a very different shape from those expectations. So I think there's going to be a lot of disappointment that people feel towards this person and that this person feels about themselves. But the best way is for this person to be themselves, because then at least you're disappointing them for being who you are, not who you're not. Don't let people try to make you conventional. Now, obviously, we would be saying this to someone in the 1960s, and it just was a time in life when there wasn't as much option to be unconventional as there is now. So we would give this advice. I don't know that there was anything that the person could have done with it, but there you go. You will be an unconventional king. And this chart is perhaps asking you to disidentify with those classic sun leadership things and work with that as a spiritual quest. What a deep quest that really is, even for all of us in the world, as we look at the way we treat the planet. All of that drive, that masculine energy, we really do need to balance now with the more sustainable female energy that this chart has in spades there. Beautiful, nearly full moon in the 10th house. So how can this person embrace the disidentifying with the sun as a very powerful spiritual quest, perhaps for all of us? So these are the pieces of advice we could give to Prince Charles's 20-year-old self. As we look back now over the whole of this podcast, we've had a wonderful chance to reminisce about our own self being 20, to think about what questions would we have been interested in. Would they have been life path, first house, career, 10th house, happiness, 4th house, and our worries in the 3rd and our losses in the 12th? As you reflect on what you've learned in your life by experience, what do you think can be of value to say to oneself at 20? And as we've looked at these very different birth charts, Billie Eilish, Naomi Osaka, Prince Charles, can we see how unique everyone's path is, how everyone has their own demons and obstacles that, regardless of the good fortune in the chart, they're also dealing with those darker sides. And Vedic astrology can help us see that the lightness and the darkness is happening at the same time, and they're part of the same person, and give us tips and indicators of how to integrate the light and the dark in our own chart. And as you reflect back on the question from the beginning of this podcast, what could Vedic astrology have said to your 20-year-old self? Do you also see those words of advice for the self? Was your life path clear and supported? Or did it take some twists and turns into some complicated jungles and forests? Was it aligned with your career? And did the planets that guide your life path and your career, were they aligned together in similar houses and signs that share the goals around artha or karma or dharma or moksha? Was happiness in any way linked to your life path and your career, and has that borne itself out as you have walked your way down your path? And what about the things that you worry about, preoccupy your mind? Can you see, are they tied into this story as well? Or do they undermine what you experience by giving you doubts and worries? And what about losses? Has that been a significant shaper in your life, as perhaps we've seen that it was and will be, continue to be in Prince Charles's life? I would love to hear your answers. Obviously, this is what I focus on all the time. So I'm fascinated by anything that you want to share about your own insights into what you wish Vedic astrology had shared with you when you were in your 20s. All right, I think that wraps it up for today. Thank you very much for hanging on in here till the end of the podcast. I look forward to your thoughts and to seeing you on the next podcast when we explore another aspect of Vedic astrology. All right, until then, stay well. Bye.